the second episode of the Lowlife film show. I'm Scout Tafoya, and today I've got two very special guests on with me to talk about all things film. Specifically, first, we have a conversation with my good friend Eli Ianacone about the Romanian film The Second Game. And then later on we have the New York critic Tanner Tafelski on to talk all things Bruno Dumont. So let's stop in with Eli first. In honor of the fact that the ninth edition of the Romanian Film Festival held at the Lincoln Center just took place, and the fact that Corneliu Porumboiu's latest film, Metabolism, or When Evening Falls on Bucharest, has just been released, I thought I would talk about his latest documentary, The Second Game, in which he and his father, a former soccer referee, sit down and watch one of the final games that he refereed before the fall of Ceausescu in 1989. Eli is probably one of the most committed sports fans I knew, and I thought if anybody could provide a fresh perspective on the film, it would be him. So we sat down and watched it one Sunday, and afterwards I asked him what he thought. All right, I guess first of all, was it one of the better soccer games you've seen?
Probably not, no.
Probably not, no?
No, definitely hard fought.
Yeah?
That makes for a good game, but not enough action. Not enough excitement.
Yeah. And, I mean, I guess this match doesn't really hold the, weight over here that it might in Romania, but you hadn't heard of any of their, history before. You're aware of them now, but...
Well, Stal, the one team that was in it, is still a successful team to this day. So I've heard of the team, followed them here and there. They're in a lot of Champions League games, which means they play some of your favorite teams. They play some of the biggest teams in the world. But I had no idea that they were doing that then. You know?
Okay. And I don't know, the dad clearly has, Adrian, or however you pronounce it, has all this nostalgia for the athletes that used to be on the team. Do you think that he's sort of just nostalgizing to nostalgize, or do you think he's, onto something?
Well, I mean, he gets to see them in game. He gets to see them play. That's why he's you can tell when he's always commenting on how hard fought, everything's hard fought, and look how hard they're playing. He says it constantly. And you can tell because, first of all, you can see it in the video, but secondly, he was there watching them do that.
Right.
Game in, game out, throughout the seasons. You can tell that he actually pays attention to it. I think he's doing it because he got to see it up close, whereas most people don't and wouldn't recognize it as much. I don't think he's, glorifying it over, anyone else. If he got to be placed in or referee a game now, he would probably say the same thing about certain players, but I think it's just the fact that he got to see it up close and personal that he comments so heavily on it.
And he also constantly says, basically, if you were to make this into a movie, nobody would watch it, and there's no reason for any of that stuff. Do you think that there's value in reviewing older matches? I mean, obviously there's, a sort of a political bent to this, which makes it a little different, but...
There's definitely value, and I'm sure that there's professionals that do it all the time, but the fact is it's, from a spectator's point of view, it's not nearly as exciting. And the thing about following soccer in America, or football, whatever, you're updating all the time. You're always looking at, who's talented right now, and he's right when he says that there's no point in, this is just in the past, he says, or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's true because there's something about a fan base nowadays that it's just, you want to find out what's going on new and what's constantly changing, because that kind of stuff is stagnant, I guess, is what he's trying to say, and there's no point in watching this because things change. You can tell. He talks about the rule changes. He talks about, play style changes, and it's true to a point. That kind of stuff becomes irrelevant, I think. I mean, it's cool when it's got its place in history outside of soccer. It's cool when it's got its... it's just... The game has changed so much that it's hard to take from those older games and, apply it to now, I think.
And this was the first Romanian film you've seen, you think?
Probably, yeah. I can't think of any other Romanian films I'd see.
What do you think of it as a film as opposed to just a match?
The audio track is really interesting. Listening to, like, you can tell they're father and son to a point. I mean, you can tell, like, that he's not willing to, like, let the son, you know, like, guide the conversation very much at all. Like, he kind of is, and, you know, maybe, I don't know how that relationship is between them, but you can tell he's kind of like, I don't want to say stubborn, but he's just, you know, he knows what, he's straight and, you know, doesn't want to give his son anything, ever, you know, which is like, fine, I guess. It's just a strange relationship, I think, and you get to hear it.
Yeah, and that kind of puts an extra layer of tension over everything.
And
that you're seeing.
it makes it deeper as a film. I think it gives you a whole new dynamic. That's just not just us watching a soccer game, which I could do
Anytime.
2 days a week.
Yeah, exactly. So would you recommend this film?
I mean, if you're... Yeah, I mean, I would to anybody who's watching, or who's, I don't know, wants to see soccer of old, because you don't get to see it anymore. Like, there's the highlight reels now, and the stuff that you're going to watch now is nothing like soccer in this time. It doesn't, like, it's not the same game. It's a totally different game. So, for one, there's that, if you're a soccer fan that wants to look at something that's changed. Definitely, historically, take a look at it. If you wanna, like, the thing is, I was expecting more of, like, a historical background on what was actually going on politically and stuff. And he definitely mentions, you know, it's the Communist Party versus the Communist Party, not the Communist Party versus the bourgeoisie. Yeah, exactly. When it should have been that, which is a cool comment to have, but they don't really go too deep into it. You know, you can obviously use your imagination when you're watching it, and they take shot, like the camera he was talking about, how anytime there was conflict, camera was right off the field, immediately off the field, which is a comment in itself. So there's definitely those little bits, but it's just, I think it's 3 elements. It's the game, the relationship between father and son, and then lastly, taking a backseat is the political aspects of what's going on.
Right.
I'd say that's the heart of the film there.
Well, all right. Thank you very much.
This last month, Bruno Dumont's latest comedy, which is a phrase I never thought I would hear myself say, Le Petit Cancan, was released online at fandor.com and into a handful of theaters. I thought I would catch up on some of the other Dumont that I had missed over the years, and in the process discovered that his most polarizing film, 29 Palms, had a strong fan in critic Tanner Tafelski. So Tanner and I got together and over Skype one night had a long, rambling conversation about Dumont and his fetishes and themes, and tried to get to the bottom of his whole thing. Long day. Joining me from South Bend, Indiana, is Tanner Tafelski. Am I saying that right?
Tanner Tafelski, yes.
Tanner Tafelski. He's written for Film Comment, and you can find him on his blog, Mongrel Muse. In honor of Bruno Dumont's latest film, Petit Cancan, coming out on Fandor and in limited release, Tanner and I are going to talk about the career of enfant terrible Bruno Dumont and sort of try to get to the bottom of his obsessions. But mostly what I'm hoping comes of this conversation is that Tanner can somehow convince me that 29 Palms is Dumont's best film, because I'm like on the fence about it. Like I liked it so much more than I thought I would, given where it started. But it's still I'm still confused, and I still have questions. So why don't you tell me what it is that struck you most about that film?
Well, with me, I feel like it is somewhat condenses with what he was doing with the life of Jesus and humanity, and that, I mean, he's going provocative images, and it condenses it down to basically the elemental, with like these primal urges down to brutal acts and gestures that maybe he hints at in the Life of Jesus and Humanity. And again, it's also somewhat of an outlier, since it is in America, and he's using like the southwest of the U.S. in the Joshua Tree National Park. I find it that film, when I saw it, like immediately left an impression on me. Like immediately left an impression on me, where I find with his prior films as well as his later stuff that I'm detached. And I mean that's what he's going for. That's what his sort of what he calls like neutral aesthetic is. But here it's much more.
Well, it's certainly more animalistic. It's certainly more immediate, the gestures. I mean, you sort of drift in that Vincent Gallo kind of way for long stretches of time, but when the action finally happens, it's impossible to not know what's happening, to not be drawn into it. I think that, the sexuality is almost like a parody of kind of bad art house sex, because they're like screaming and crying, and there's wailing and gnashing of teeth.
Yeah. But I mean, I think I like it because it also just like fuels into that sort of like energy, that sort of primal energy, where like it's like it's almost the male character is just like unleashing like verbal violence, just like it's just like words are basically amount to like sex and violence. Yeah.
Now, after having seen, because I think I'm with you in that Humanité and Life of Jesus are alienating in that they don't give you much reason to want to join the protagonists on their journey. They're sort of unlikable characters, and so they're tough to identify with. And so when the action sort of floats around them as opposed to being directly about them, it's very easy to find yourself pulling away from them. Now, did you find yourself getting, like, I would say maybe a little more involved with, say, Hadowitch or Camille Claudel?
I would say so. With Hadowitch, I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
Yeah, that has plagued me since the day I saw it, how to pronounce that film, because I loved it so much and I couldn't recommend it to anybody because I couldn't say it.
Yeah, it's like, with that, maybe because Dumont is so like focused on her for most of the film, majority of the film, that you're more involved with her. And with Camille Claudel, I find it still hard to disassociate myself with Binoche and have her sort of persona, her baggage go along with Camille Claudel.
Yeah. Of the post 29 Palms Dumont films, which, I mean, obviously they're probably all still kind of rattling around in your brain because they're very much like that. They have that sort of effect.
Yeah.
Which of those films did you like best?
Can.
Yeah. It's really very good.
It is good. I find it like, I don't know, I feel like he's one of the most like self-referential, like self-recycling directors I find. Like Can feels like a sort of remake of Life of Jesus, but with this policier element.
Yeah, it's almost like he sent somebody in to like investigate his first 6 films or first 7 films. Like there's all these repeated imagery from Orsetan. He's like, the thing I love about it is that all you got to do is make people wander around that that sort of seaside village that he lives in, and all of a sudden you're quoting him, And so he's quoting himself by virtue of the fact that he keeps going over these same areas. And, you know, he's got a man and a woman, which is his preferred dynamic. It does feel very much like he's looking back on all of his work, you know. It's sort of like when they spy the 2001 soundtrack in the record store in Clockwork Orange. It's this kind of tongue-in-cheek looking back and saying, like, well, my films are the only ones that you need to use to read this. Do you think he kind of goes off mission when he tries to make you laugh in Can, or do you think it sort of just adds to his cumulative effect?
I do. I think, I don't know, as the miniseries went on, I find myself laughing less and less. I think the first episode is hilarious, and it goes into the stuff he's interested in, the sort of interrogation of, like, religion, where you have the most, like, laughable funeral ceremony ever put on film.
Yeah, I just reviewed it for Roger Ebert, and for safety's sake, I just called it one of the 2 or 3 funniest funerals ever. But I don't think I've seen a funnier funeral than that. Like, I don't even. It's the most absurd desecration I've ever seen. It's so wonderful. Just the thing where he's got them, like, dancing to kind of keep the ritual going, where they have to go up and down on the table, and it was like,
oh yeah,
that was unbelievable. That was so fucking funny.
Yeah, there's something it reminded me of. Oh yeah, like, just like his use of, like, music, like that scene in, like, the funeral, in the funeral in Can, like, reminds me of, like, Adowich, like, just with the accordions.
Yeah. I think he has an interesting relationship to music where he doesn't like to rely on it. It's there, but it's almost an afterthought in every case. And so, like, I'm thinking there's a dance sequence in Adowich, and there's obviously the singing competition in Can that feel very much like the narrative stops, and here's this scene, and nothing else is allowed to interfere with that. I think that he's sort of got this precious attitude towards, you know, what can and can't happen during scenes. He segments the narrative. You know, if you're watching a sex scene, that is all you're watching. Nothing else is allowed to come in, you know. And I wonder if that's, you know, it feels like a side effect of the religious thinking where you sort of have to preserve the ritual. You know, you're not supposed to laugh in church or something like that. You shouldn't be on your phone during a funeral or a wedding. What do you think of his, you know, the way that he treats religion in his films?
Obviously, there is, like, this metaphysical, transcendental element that he's working on, but I feel like the religion, when it comes about, this in the most, like, explicit cases, is him sort of, like, analyzing it or commenting on it or undermining it explicitly in Adowich. You can see it in, like, Our Satan. But if there's, like, this sort of, like, profundity, this sort of sacredness, it seems somewhat with nature, but also pulling against it, at, like, a nature that's indifferent, explicitly so. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I don't know, something stuck with him. Like, I personally don't know exactly what his, you know, sort of what his religious habits are these days, whether he still goes to church or something like that, but I feel like he probably doesn't, just because Jesus is kind of magic when he wants him to be. Like, sometimes, you know what I mean, when they call upon religious forces, it's to do, like, straight up miracles, or to, like, completely condemn people. It feels very literal in a kind of in a not sensitive way, but that's also, I think, totally fascinating, that he'll allow for, you know, actual miracles to take place, but for the most part, it's people sort of, like, flagellating themselves and sort of lying in terror, waiting for Judgment Day.
Yeah, Yeah, I don't know. There's like this sense of fate,
Mm.
fate to a lot of his works with humanity. There's like the main character just like saying like this is the most horrible thing, this murder of this girl. That was like going back to 29 Palms. It's like this ominous eye, this camera, this sort of ominous presence there that I don't know. It feels like there's like an apocalypse like waiting to happen before you realize it at the end.
29 Palms is one of the only films that doesn't sort of directly invoke God, and yet it's the one that is sort of absolutely like you're saying the most apocalyptic because you know he kind of turns himself into this satanic figure at the end. You know, I guess there's a case you could make where there's sort of Adam and Eve wandering away from the garden or whatever and just yeah, interesting. Do you revisit 29 Palms?
I just did for this, and like I still think it's very like shocking. I like it because it's so on the surface. I love that aspect of it. I like the Dumont does this in general, but I think it's his best use of it, of just like presenting just bodies of figures in the most base fashion.
Mm-hmm.
This is like the point, like the high point of it, and you're seeing these figures in this sort of waxing and waning relationship where like flare-ups happen on the most stupid reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And the ending pushes it into just a whole nother realm, a whole nother movie, and it makes all of the, like this sort of meaningful banality like very, I don't know, great in my opinion.
So watching it again, like, you know, I don't know if this was the first time you've visited since seeing it, but watching it again, knowing where it goes, did that turn it into a different experience? You know, were you looking for something else?
It did. That probably like facilitated this sort of inevitability of it. I think the desolation is more pronounced. The fact that like there are these characters on the margins of the film, but they're not interacting with really anybody. It's this most like isolated, like alienating film that he has, and I think that it's like this is like the sticking film.
and you like that sense of purposeful alienation while sticking so close to these. I mean, you can't help but be with them, and yet everything around them is so alienating, and even the things that they do are also alienating. But you're with them the entire time. There's nowhere to roam. Basically, you can't get away from them.
Yeah, and I don't know. I like this sort of like provocative, extreme cinema. This falls into a lot of the films that were being made at the time. There's a trend in French cinema of like Claire Denis and Trouble Every Day,
Mm-hmm.
and Gaspar Noé, and Philippe Grandrieux, and just this sort of like really like extreme cinema that is, I feel, doing a lot more engaging stuff formally, visually, at the time that really struck me.
Mm-hmm. So of the new French extremist stuff, this is your go-to?
Yeah.
And it's funny, I was like thinking about how insane and very much in keeping and sort of towing the new French extremist line the sex scenes are, and that was something that I was sort of prepared to use as a sort of baton against it. But then I remembered how much I love that same, it's used differently, but it's the same kind of tactic in Pola X. You know what I mean? This grasping towards a very, very, you know, it was supposed to be this forbidden, you know, hungry sexuality. And, you know, I had to think about for a second why it is that I thought it, you know, provocative and interesting and beautiful and tragic in Pola X, but so alienating in 29 Palms. And maybe it's the simple fact that the lights are on and that he's, you know, sort of being honest about these abject desires, you know, this kind of... Yeah, Pola X kind of predates a lot of that new French extremist stuff. It doesn't really get talked about in that same breath.
Yeah, it's sort of like... It's sort of just at the brink of it. It's like late 90s, I believe.
Yeah, 99, 2000. Of all of his films, I think the one that I, like, sort of didn't have any use for was Humanité. Like, there are great moments in Humanité. Like, I love the scene where his prostitute friend cries and all we see is her vagina. And so it's as if that's crying for her. It sort of reminded me of the last shot of Wayward Cloud, where you see Li Kangshen's ass crying a single tear of sweat. But yeah, I kind of loved that device, which sort of, you know, rhymes with the opening, you know, very, very graphic shot of the deceased young girl's vagina in the field. And I also will never forget him kissing the man they find guilty of the murders before they take him away. I was like, what the hell is this? This is so great.
Well, I don't know. Like watching that film, I was like getting, I guess, turned off. But then it was like, I don't know, like a day or two afterwards that it's really made an impression on me. I kept like going back to it in my mind, thinking of stuff, and like, yeah, I think it's one of his best films.
Yeah.
With Life of Jesus and 29 Palms.
So, all right, let's do the most basic thing we can do here, and just rank them.
All right.
Let's do it. What else are people here for? Listicles.
Give the people what they want, man.
That's what they want. That's the direction we're going. I gotta say, all right. I'm thinking it's probably out of which Can probably a toss-up between. Can I say I really like Flandre? I expected to hate it. What do you think of that? Like did that do anything?
Hated that.
You hated it?
Yes. Just that like the I don't know the cross-cutting like between like the war and going back to the country
just didn't do it for you.
Just did not do it for me. That was the time where I'm like, come on, Dumont.
And it's funny, you're not the only person who've had that reaction. I went back and consulted some reviews from when it came out, and I think we've seen you do this before. You don't need to do it again, but I kind of just loved, I don't know, I loved him sending his horrible, you know, his demons out into the world and having them fail. I kind of love that idea that as awful as they are at home, they're even worse abroad.
Yeah. I don't know. It's his war film, I guess, and he likes playing the genres. And in this case, I don't think it kind of works.
I mean, like, even as I was watching it, I was totally like, I know I should hate this. Nothing's happening. There's no growth. It's the same fucking movie, but it was, I don't know, something about the rhythm of the thing, or maybe just the way that he filmed the desert in this kind of, I don't know, it felt also, and this, I don't know how much credit I can give him for this, but it felt very much like his first film that pointed the finger of blame somewhere other than his, you know, kind of typically gormless, you know, harmful protagonist, because as much as it felt like a film about the, you know, the French's involvement in the war, it felt so much more about the U.S. Like, because it was our war, and the French just sort of showed up, you know, to do their bit, and that's what it felt like. And And I think I appreciated that, and I feel like a film like that didn't get made in the States, for a very long time. I don't even know that I don't know that such a thing exists now. I've never seen De Palma's Redacted because I have never heard a single word spoken in its defense. So
Zachary Campbell, I guess, has a good piece on his blog if you ever have a chance.
Oh, about Redacted.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm putting that on the list.
All right.
There we go. Awesome. But yeah, no, I think that maybe that's the reason that I sort of went with its sort of vision of abject cruelty. But, sometimes I found with myself that loving a film that is deliberately unlovable is sometimes just a total matter of chance, just a matter of whether or not, I thought the same thing when I, for whatever goddamn reason, watched every single Italian cannibal film way back in the day.
Okay.
Like, in college, I was bored, and I sort of had it in my head that I was going to watch every grotesque thing ever made. So I watched Men Behind the Sun and Cannibal Holocaust and whatever, this, that, and the other. And I was, like, holding up these cannibal films at levels to be like, well, no, this is the one that did it right. And it's like, well, what have you become? Like, how do you hold the one up over the other? And in that, I think, was a big part of, like, learning to try to defend the trash that you like. And I'm not quite ready to totally stand in Flandre's defense as anything other than a film that I just kind of happened to enjoy. Like, I don't know that it does anything right. I really don't.
Yeah.
But all right, so let me try this again. Let's start at the beginning. Auto-Witch at the top, definitely, because that film was hugely important to me. I saw it the day before I shot, like, my first feature film, like the first real one, I guess. And that, I don't know, just his relationship to her face with the camera and her
the push-ins.
Yep.
Yeah.
The push-ins, the scenes with her in the hotel in the very beginning, where she's just back from the convent and sort of reacquainting herself with, what a conventional space feels like, and she's sort of, walking around after having showered for what was probably the first time since leaving, and it was just like, I don't know, those moments of a kind of imprisoning freedom were really kind of got right inside my my heart. And I think about that film all the time, and just the beautiful way that it uses silence and movement, and I don't know, I this is also a harder thing, but I think she probably gives my favorite performance in any Dumont film, because she feels sort of a splinter, sort of a she could be the children of his normal characters, but she doesn't feel like one of his usual characters. There's something about her reticence and her fear, combined with her kind of, I don't know, her want to connect with something for a reason. Like, she won't just make friends. There has to be something behind it, because she's had this incredible relationship with, her God, and so now, stripped of that, I think that connection has to mean something for her, which is how she gets herself into the trouble to begin with. So yeah, Auto-Witch at the top for me, then probably Can, then maybe Camille Claudel, which I also admit I liked better than most people. Then probably 29 Palms, Life of Jesus, Flanders, and Manatee. Oh no, Or Satan. I like Or Satan better than Life of Jesus by just a little. I always forget about Or Satan. It's because nothing happens.
It feels like his most mannered film.
Mm-hmm. That was I feel like the breaking point where he realized he couldn't just keep doing the same thing. Like, Or Satan and Flanders in one career, that's too much. That's too much of the same thing.
Yeah.
Okay, what do you got? What do you say?
All right.
Okay.
29 Palms.
Okay.
Humanité.
All right.
Life of Jesus.
Okay.
Probably Auto-Witch. Camille Claudel.
Mm-hmm.
Or Occitan, then Flanders.
And then where's Con in there?
Oh, Con, jeez. Actually, like behind Life of Jesus.
Okay.
I'm still processing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned being, sort of increasingly, you found yourself laughing a lot less. Why do you suppose that was? Did you see, like, old Dumont creeping in, or was it just sort of not to your, did it just stop speaking to you?
Maybe a little of old Dumas creeping in,
Mm-hmm.
but I feel like he sort of retailers his aesthetic to fit the miniseries format. It
Right.
seems like it's more streamlined,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know if he's lost something in that or not. Maybe that's why.
Interesting. So you think that his rhythm definitely picked up because so much more happens, because it has to per episode, kind of. So you think that in forcing incident, he's maybe getting away from his strengths?
It's just not the Duma that, like,
You've come to know and love?
I've come to know and love, for better or for worse.
Yeah, I hear you. I think, and again, obviously you sort of, you bring your whole history with a filmmaker in every time you see something by them, but I was like, I don't know, maybe it was that I was so in love with the idea that I found so much of it funny that kept me laughing the whole time. But I do also just, like, Bernard Provost's performance as the commandant, the detective, that's the most ingenious comedic performance I've ever seen. It's so wonderful. Like, his whole performance in A Line to Me is Carpentier, his assistant, says floats a theory by him, and he says, like, no, that's impossible. Maybe you're right. There's no pause. He just goes it's so awesome that he's got to put up a front that he's where logic stops, that nothing gets by him. But then as soon as he hears, no, maybe you're right. Like, he has to, turn on a dime to make sure that he kind of keeps his composure as he becomes increasingly ridiculous. And I also found, he was one of the few, nice people in the Dumont universe. He's always, kind of a dick, certainly in the way that he, I love him yelling at the kids constantly to, stay, off their, that was, yeah. But, he also deeply cares about people, which is incredibly rare in the Dumont universe. There's very, very rarely a sense that there's a good person looking out for everybody.
Yeah.
And how do you think, what do you think about generosity kind of coming into his, into his usual bag of tricks? Or do you like your Dumont hopeless?
I do like that side of Dumont, the hopeless side.
Mm-hmm.
But the generosity, I think, has always been there. It's just in this more pronounced way.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's there in Humanity.
I agree.
Just with this most feeling character who's trying to absorb people's emotions. But this generosity, I like. The focus on Con and the girl, his girlfriend, is one of the more touching moments in Dumont.
Yeah.
But it's sort of spiked because they're racist too.
Yeah, he can't ever let us get away with liking somebody. He has to kind of throw a stumbling block in our path to the character, which is something I kind of hate him for. But I think he drew Can so well that it was sort of easy to overlook the racism in whenever he holds the girlfriend close and just tells her everything's gonna be it's such an adult gesture, and it's so perfectly sensitive, and it's so loving. You know what I mean? There's this issue of safety, and he just That's what he wants to give her more than anything else, is safety. And that's the thing that everybody in his universe constantly lacks. So it's like he's his perfect protagonist, but the problem with being the kind of perfect Dumont protagonist is that you're also a racist. You have to hate the Arab population around your French village.
I was thinking about, like, just the idea of, like, these mixed characters, and how you're talking about Khan, how he's, like, protective, but he's also a racist. That, like, there's just, like, almost, like, interesting, like, territoriality with, like, all of the characters in Dumont, where, like, they're trying to protect this space, protect this character. It's even in, like 29 Palms, where the couple are, like, crossing a street, and, like, this car just, like, zooms past, and they're just like shouting at them, "This is my road, get off." Always beware of, like, zooming cars in a Dumont film.
Yep. Because they bring trouble, and they frequently cart people off where you can't get to them anymore. Yeah, people kind of... I hadn't thought about that before, but you're absolutely right. The people kind of just drop into the narrative and ruin everything and leave again. You know what I mean? They're sort of acts of God personified. Just these things you can't explain or control. Probably the best of them is the little kid in Can who thinks he's Spider-Man but doesn't quite get the concept of Spider-Man.
Yes, that's right. Or, yeah.
But that's interesting, the protection of spaces, because, I mean, I think that there's something of that to Dumont himself, which is that he never leaves, and when he does, he immediately comes back. You know, he had to come home after 29 Palms, this kind of, you know, wild excursion, and it almost felt like it was something he felt he had to do for probably more than one reason, but it was, you know, that same thing where Wim Wenders made films in his section of Germany, you know what I mean, and then came here to do Paris, Texas, and I forget where he filmed Hammett, but that was an assignment. That wasn't his idea. And or, you know, Paolo Sorrentino doing This Must Be the Place. You know, they feel very much in that sort of mold, which I guess goes all the way back to Zabriskie Point. And yeah, 29 Palms, I think, has a lot of Zabriskie in it. And I find that aspect of it incredibly alluring, because I've always loved Zabriskie, and I've always, like, felt that it's not gotten anywhere near its due for as you know, kind of wild and jagged and full of, you know, little things to be read in there. And I think that maybe I need to open myself up to 29 Palms in the same way that I sort of opened myself to Zabriskie, because it's almost like its evil twin in a lot of ways.
With Zabriskie Point, there's, like, commentary on the U.S., on America, through visual, like, a lot of visual cues or whatever, through the billboards and everything of consumerism. And I mean, in 29 Palms, he's doing somewhat the same thing, doing, like, the visual commentary of interrogating American myths. But I don't know, personally, I find that the least interesting of 29 Palms.
I was gonna say, I was tempted to ask you just now, like, what do you think it's saying? But I don't think it's as simple as that. I don't know that that's the right, like, set of expectations to bring to that film. To be like, you know, what is it saying about us? Like, well, nothing. You know, Zabriskie had a lot of misplaced ambition in that it sort of felt like it was going to unearth, you know, everything that was wrong with America, and, you know, is most interesting when it's at its most diffuse, you know, and all that stuff is shoved in the background as sort of window dressing. But the main component of 29 Palms is this tension between them as they sort of drift together and apart and together and apart. And sometimes it gets sort of unbearable as you realize that the minutest argument or disagreement is going to end with them shouting at each other. and his solution, more often than not, to solving their problems is through this incredibly violent sexual, congress. And
then with the whole like sexual urge, like tipping over into violence itself.
Mm-hmm.
Violence. It seems like sex itself, I mean, in Dumont is pretty violent. Going back to like this whole like omniscient eye thought.
Mm-hmm.
Like on a second viewing, I noticed this like reoccurring like visual motif, I guess, where constantly the male character is looking at Katya from behind, from like the power, like this sort of like voyeuristic dominant gaze,
mm-hmm.
and from that it goes immediately to sex, and it's at one point he's looking at rock formations, and it's a continuation from looking at the rock formations to Katya, and then from Katya to having this violent sex.
Mm-hmm. It feels like he went out there searching for meaning, and like he was going to put the pieces of their relationship back together and sort of like find himself as an artist. And when all that fails, he just sort of resorts to this, kind of wounded, angry sexual intercourse.
Just as like a footnote,
mm-hmm.
I guess Dumont, when he was making this project, he as you know, he doesn't like working with professional actors,
mm-hmm.
and in this case, I don't think he had a hand in selecting the actors. I know that the production was like pretty much like horrible,
mm-hmm.
like and I think that like reflects very well
yeah
in the film.
It's definitely it feels like it was born out of torment. It feels like, I mean, the ending is sort of it's revenge on the whole idea of having left your home in the first place. Yekaterina Golovina was I mean, up until that point, probably the biggest name he'd ever worked with, because again, she was in Pola X not long ago, and she was married to Sarunas Bartos. She'd appeared in some of his films, and obviously Bartos is also in Pola X. But yeah, that's about as big as he had gotten at that point, and he again, retreated into the unknown until Juliette Binoche in Camille Claudel, and that itself felt like he chose her because he needed to impart that she was somebody, that she was the artist, surrounded by the unwell, and that that has a logic to it, missing from suddenly casting, this kind of budding European starlet in his film, no matter how interesting her back catalog, because Lord knows nobody had as eclectic a filmography as that gal. But you're right, it's definitely a film, and they're very rare that where the horrifying experience of making the movie is what you come away from having watched it. You know what I mean? Other than like, geez, The Last Movie or World War Z or something like that, or Quantum of Solace. Mark Forster's had a lot of bad luck too. Speaking of Europeans abroad. What else do you know about how poorly things went? I'm afraid I haven't done my research here.
I know there's like a Region 2 DVD. I haven't had access to it, but
mm-hmm.
there's a Region 2 DVD of 29 Palms where there's a making of, and supposedly making of featurette, and supposedly that a lot of this sort of feuding between like the male character and sort of Dumont's dominant, strident, manipulating tactics
mm-hmm.
are on display.
And he does feel ill-suited to the milieu. And he's so weaselly and pointed and shrill in a way that Dumont's characters are just not. He feels like the outsider, and obviously that helps, with his situation where he's constantly at odds with everything and he's in control of nothing. But
yeah.
So what do you think of their performances?
It's very awkward. The acting is very awkward.
Yep.
I think like right off the bat, I felt with male character, or just keep calling him male character. That like immediately he just like exudes this air of like arrogance to him. This, I don't know who mentioned it when I was reading up on it. Called him like an aging hipster. And he sort of reminds me of that.
Yep.
But yeah, I don't know. I think they capture like just this ebb and flow of their relationship pretty well. It makes for a eye-opening double bill with the, like before sunrise.
Yeah. The feeling that you had, walking away from 29 Palms the first time, can you think of other times, other films, or, even works of art, albums, paintings, books, that you've sort of had that same kind of welcome shock?
I think this is like, it's been happening more and more, but I mean, it's been around, this type of shock in art house cinema for a while. I feel
certainly.
Adrian Martin has a great article on it. He talks about how this sort of trend where you're having, in like, for better or for worse terms, called slow cinema or contemplative cinema, in which you have mundane, dead air filmmaking, and you have like these jolting scenes, usually at the end, which could arguably started with Chantal Akerman and John Dielman.
Yeah.
And from there, I mean, you have like people like Claire Denis, Ama Escalante, a lot of Carlos Regadas, a lot of filmmakers introducing these sort of like, I don't know, shock tactics to slow cinema, which I enjoy. They always leave an impression on me.
I'm with you there to a certain extent, because there's nothing I love more than sort of forming a relationship to the way an image is being presented to me. Like I'm like slow cinema fanboy number one. And side note, what a year it's been for slow cinema. I feel like that term is sort of, it's not that I don't like it, I love it, because there's nothing I love more than telling people I love slow cinema, but it's almost not quite getting at what, these films are sort of presenting now. Like, I've been calling it trance cinema for a little while, because you sort of just find your focal point and you're just sort of like watching little figures in a landscape. Journey to the West, Simon Leong's latest, or Lisandro Alonso's. There's this sense of very purposefully letting your eyes fix on one thing and having the background go in and out of focus, and they're inducing states as much as they're trying to get you to think about the image itself, and I love that. I completely adore that. But I think where you and I differ is maybe that the introduction at the last minute of something, violent to sort of shake up the rhythm, I don't always respond as well to that. I think, I wasn't really the world's biggest fan of Post Tenebris Lux, Carlos Regadas' latest either, but I really do wonder at the final shot of a man pulling his own head off. I can't help but feel like that had personal significance to him, that I was maybe not paying careful enough attention to the rest of the film's sort of strands to pick up and have it mean something to me as well by the time I arrived there. And I don't know if that was the Regatas you were thinking of specifically. But yeah. And Ama Escalante I'm kind of hit or miss on too. I really liked Heli for reasons I can't put my finger on. Do you like that one too?
Yes, I think he gets better. He's gotten progressively better over 3 films, which I can't believe. It is so good. Just that whole looping structure of the narrative. Probably with 29 Palms, I guess I'm twisted. It's just like this whole like air of like violence is like seeped into it, into the film. And I don't know. I feel like all of his films are about the home, about like penetrations of the home, of like intrusions of the home, of like making the home foreign. That's what like Helly at one point seemed like.
Yeah, no, it's true. And again, that sort of plays right into, what we're saying about protectiveness of space, that essentially, what you learn in Dumont is that state of mind, this, home is not a real place. And everybody who thinks it is reminded that it's not in the most violent way imaginable. That they go abroad and they bring their sort of small town conception of what's right and wrong and what belongs to them with them, and it never works. Camille Claudel, she never loses sight of the fact that she believes that she is owed her legacy and her freedom, and that when her brother, the one representative of home that she has left, will come, he will save her, and he shows up and he does nothing. He just leaves her broken. And then I think the film ends.
He's literally walking out.
What a heartbreaking movie. But even still, I think Binoche did such amazing work in that part. Like I think she was really going for it in a way that, she like, as much as I love Certified Copy and everything that she's in, I feel like she kind of really pulled out the stops for Camille Claudel. Well, we're coming up on the hour mark, so I'll close the floor. I'll see if there's something else. What? Is there any final thoughts on Messer Dumont?
People should watch 29 Palms. People should. I don't know. That might be a deal breaker for people.
Well, but I think that, and obviously this is its own kind of like pat cop-out sort of answer, but if the film makes you outraged, and there's something to that. You have to figure out why it outrages you, because that's going to help you figure out what your relationship to art is and where your comfort zone is and the things that really appeal to you are. Like I've said this for as long as anybody's been listening to me, but you don't know how great art affects you until you've seen how like terrible art affects you, or how outraged you can become at something, and then you have to figure out why, and that's so important. So even if you hate 29 Palms, and I don't hate 29 Palms, I started out thinking I was going to, but it got back to me at the end, and I sort of realized there was a little more going on than it first seemed. There's there is so much value in figuring out which controversial film or which classic works for you and what doesn't. Yeah. I think the mistake so many people make is assuming that because something is called a classic, that means that you have to like it and you have to deal with it on its own terms. Ditto these sort of famously graphic, in any genre, horror or movies about extreme sexuality, that they have to be these forbidding objects that you're not allowed to respond to in conventional ways. But sometimes those are the films that speak to you loudest and clearest and really sort of get to you. Like, and maybe this is again asking a little too much, but when you first saw 29 Palms, did it sort of make you come to understand something about your relationship to, even if it was just a certain strain of new French extremist cinema? Did you find yourself realizing things, or like did you feel something open up, when this film that has famously divisive, spoke to you in the way that it did?
I don't mean, I was like shocked. I was like left with like that permanently like last 10, 15 minutes like seared on my brain. It's like when you have like images like that, and they don't have to be incredibly violent.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it's I don't know that it's memorable. It's memorable. I mean, you're thinking about it, and there's a lot of films that I could say don't do that.
That's something. I will never forget so much of 29 Palms, because it makes you appreciate the silences between the arguments. And it makes you really aware of what's happening at all times, because you know that at any moment something could happen. Because you know these people are not happy, and you know that they communicate in very unhealthy ways. And so you're waiting, and as soon as you know what they're capable of, it suddenly seems that anything could happen. You know, when I saw it for the first time, I was expecting something so much worse than what happened. You know, and not to say that, you know, it doesn't end in a very, very graphic and shocking and hopeless place, but I thought it would get so much worse, because I knew that at that point, like, anything could have happened, and I wouldn't have been surprised. I think I was more surprised that more didn't happen. Did you have any sense going into it, like, what was going to happen, or was it...
I had a sense that it was pretty, like, jarring, violent.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe it's the way that, like, Dumont films it, because that initial violent action is, I don't know, atypical of Dumont, because it's very rapid.
Mm-hmm.
It's a complete like break from the tendency of the prior hour plus minutes that we've been experiencing with 29 Palms,
mm-hmm.
and jarring me.
Yeah, and it is his only film that really breaks from expectation in that way. There's no other film in the Dumont canon that suddenly becomes something else. You know? And that's, you know, I think that while there's... Actually, I was about to say there's transference missing from it, but I don't think that's true, because when the men pull over and violate him, I think he sort of, like, takes in their heedless, violent urges, and then he brings them back to the hotel room with him. Even with his comedic and, you know, maybe more straightforward, dramatic breaks in his usual form, it does feel like the film that is the most out there for him.
It's his most abstract.
Yeah, for sure. At the very fact of the desert going for miles in any direction. You know what I mean? There's a sense of freedom in a lot of his compositions of a seaside town, but nothing like that. Nothing like you could get lost. Everybody always knows where they are, you know, back in those in the seaside towns. But out there, everything is lost, and everything is, you know, kind of loose and could become something else at any moment. Yeah, and it is his most abstract. You're absolutely right. I'd never considered that. Mostly because so much of the actions that people perform in his movies are so strange anyway, that there's sort of a built-in level of abstraction, but it never gets to the point that it does in 29 Palms.
It has that, like, sort of... it has that sort of circuitous narrative of like Life of Jesus or kind of canon or Humanity, where most of the films you're going in the town, out of the town, near the town. Well, with like 29 Palms, it's like desert, hotel. It's just like a constant cycle.
Yeah, and just trying to find comfort in foreign places. Like, they spend so much time in that hotel as if it's going to protect them. That's the crazy thing. When he gets attacked in the desert, she brings him back to the hotel. She doesn't find him a doctor, because she doesn't really, like, I don't think she trusts anything anymore.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that, like, Dumont never goes into the bathroom in that film.
No. That,
like, the Katya, you know, sort of, that's like one of their last fights, and then he enters the bathroom, and then out of that unleashes this hell. Other critics have noted this as well, but it seems like it sort of like ties into this whole Hitchcockian thing.
Don't go into the bathroom. The films of Bruno Dumont. Now I got to go back and watch everything he's done to see if there are any more clues that he has a phobia of restrooms. All right, and that's the beauty of his work, is that there's so much space in there to put the meaning. There's so many ways to read every little thing, and that, well, I sometimes find him enervating, is why he's like a great, great fucking artist, and I call myself a super fan. I love the dude. I really do. Well, thanks for doing this with me, man. This was a fucking blast.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. It was a pleasure talking to you about Dumont.
Dumont. Yeah, man.